So what is going on in Syria? Why is sectarian killing still going on in Syria? And why is Netanyahu intervening after helping to install the new government that he is now bombing? Well, to discuss that, I spoke to Joshua Landis. He is the Sandra Mackey Chair and Professor of Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. Joshua Landis, thanks so much for joining me.
Aaron, it's always a pleasure.
When Israel bombed Syria, that took a lot of people by surprise, especially because the Israeli government had recently been bragging that it helped oust the previous Syrian government led by Bashar al-Assad and put the new Syrian government in power. So what's going on here with Israel bombing a government that it took credit for installing?
Right. Well, Netanyahu did say that it was because he had destroyed Hezbollah in Lebanon or decimated it, that Syria and Assad fell because there was no support for him. And they'd also bombed Iran. And that that clipped the normal support for the Assad army. But he very quickly decided that he did not like the new rulers of Syria, Ahmed Shara, because he had been head of al-Qaeda for many years. And he's very closely attached to Turkey. And Turkey, of course, had welcomed Hamas leaders in Istanbul and had spoken out against Israel. So, in a sense, Iran was out, but Netanyahu said that Turkey is our new big enemy and is dangerous, if not more dangerous, than Iran.
Okay, and the pretext for this, according to Israel, is that there were atrocities being committed against the Druze in Soweto, which was happening. There were atrocities. So what happened there? And then why is Israel getting involved on their behalf, or purportedly on their behalf?
Right. Well, the Druze situation. Druze are 3% of Syria. They're a small minority, heterodox, Shia, like the Alawites or the Ismailis. They did not trust this government because the government had persecuted the Druze in the past. Ahmed Shara had killed about 20. He apologized and made up for it, but their shrines were blown apart. ISIS had forced many to convert, and Shara had been a member of ISIS before he was just al-Qaeda. So they didn't trust him. And the Druze freed themselves of Assad's rule a year ahead of the taking of Damascus. So they had set up their own autonomous regime. When Shara formulated his new constitution several months ago, an interim constitution for 5 years, it gives all the power to him. There is no democracy. You know, the parliament is appointed by him, a third directly, two-thirds indirectly. He appoints all the judges in the Supreme Court. He is everything in that country. And there is a Druze minister, but who's resigned, but they don't have any power. They are things like transportation or various things. So the real central figures are all from this al-Qaeda organization and very close to Shara, whether it's interior or defense or foreign ministry or so forth. So they didn't trust. They said, we want some kind of federal arrangement. The Kurds are saying the same thing. The Alawites are saying the same thing. They don't want to just put down their arms, because that's what he was asking. He said, I'm the ruler. I'm going to have a monopoly on power. All the minorities should put down their guns and trust us. And they said, we don't trust you. And so it became a classic standoff. And that's the background. That's the important background to this assault by the state on the Druze mountain. It's a mountainous region. It's in the south near the Jordanian border and not too far from the Golan. But there is a big Arab city, Dara, that sits between the Jebel Druze and the Golan Heights, which makes it impractical for Israel to move its troops in and protect them directly. So it used bombing. And Israel stepped in to defend the Druze. Now, Israel has, it's important to know that they have 150,000 Druze who've served loyal in the military, served loyally in the military, and are an important lobbying group that's not to be sneezed at. I know many Israeli Druze, and they were frantic to get Netanyahu to step in. Now, Netanyahu has much bigger fish to fry than just the Druze. He has got a strategic vision, which is Israel being the predominant power. And we've got to say that, Israel has established not only complete air power over Lebanon, but now over Syria, over Iraq, and today Iran as well. It doesn't want a strong Damascus, a Damascus that's armed by Turkey, that has a real army, that's spread its power over to the border. So Netanyahu said very early on, we're not going to allow Damascus to deploy its troops south of Damascus City. We're not going to allow Sharat to deploy its troops. And, in the first day that Assad fell, Israel bombed Syria 400 times.
Yeah.
Destroying its entire navy, every missile depot, any airplane that was still existent. It erased everything it could find of the old Syrian army so that Sharat would not have anything. And it's continued to bomb various airfields that Turkey is trying to resurrect, because it's very worried that Turkey will send its planes down there, build up the military, and that they'll have Turkey on Israel's border. That's what Netanyahu says. They said they're not going to do it over our dead body. And of course, America doesn't like that. But that's the Israel's, that's the situation with the Jebel Druze and Israel's entrance into this war.
So Israel, claims to be fighting the sectarian oppression, the sectarian atrocities backed by the government. But it seems to me actually that they want to foment sectarianism in Syria. I mean, they were supporting the insurgency that was sectarian. And I was reminded of a quote from way back in 2013 by an Israeli official named Alon Pinkas. He's the former Israeli consul general in New York. And he said this about Syria. This is back in 2013. He said, this is a playoff situation in which you need both teams to lose, but at least you don't want one to win. We'll settle for a tie. Let them both bleed, hemorrhage to death. Let them both bleed, hemorrhage to death. That's the strategic thinking here. As long as this lingers, there's no real threat from Syria. So what he was basically saying back then was, as long as Syria is divided, as all sides are fighting each other, then Israel is dominant. And my question to you is, do you think that is still basically Israel's strategy?
I think that's the operating. Israel wants a weak and divided Syria, one that cannot present any challenge to Israel whatsoever on the Golan or anywhere else. So in that sense, sweeping in and being defender, having this human rights position, and having the Druze actually want the Israelis to come and defend them, fits perfectly into this larger strategic vision of a broken Syria that can't get back on its feet.
And I don't want to minimize the atrocities that Druze have suffered. So talk to us a bit about what happened. For example, there seems to be a documented massacre that occurred at a hospital of Druze in Syria.
Yes. The National Hospital in Sweda, it was taken over by regime forces, and they shot doctors, nurses, patients. They threw people off the roof. They were jihadists who went in there to wreak vengeance on the Druze. And we've got to say that this came on the heels already in May. There had been a dust-up between the Druze and the central state, because the Druze had refused to make these concessions to the central state. So Sharat, who wants to spread his military control over the country, is looking for ways. And what happened in May was that this tape came out, a recording of a Druze sheikh, theoretically. The Druze denied it, said it was fake, of the sheikh saying something bad about Muhammad, the prophet. And they said, this is unacceptable, and students began to attack Druze students in dormitories, in Hama. There were demonstrations in the street, and very quickly it escalated into a situation where Druze were being attacked from one end of Syria to the other, and particularly in two towns, Jaramana and and said, on the outskirts of Damascus towards the Jebel Druze. And many jihadist types and irregulars poured in, as well as regime troops, in order to attack the Druze. And Israel came into their defense, which, of course, caused many Syrians to say, these are traitors. They're sided with Israel. Look what they're doing in Gaza. This is terrible. And we've got to kill these Druze. So that was the background, and it was festering. So a local story happened just on the 13th of July, in which Bedouin, who make up 3% of the city of Sweda, the capital city in the Jebel Druze, kidnapped a Druze merchant. And then there was a tit for tat. It exploded. Over 10 people were killed. The regime, Shadat, said, only the central police and our security soldiers can bring calm to the Jebel Druze. We're sending them in. And so they attacked. And many people felt that the Bedouin situation was really a pretext to allow the regime to try to impose its will over the Jebel Druze. And this turned into a major conflagration because the Druze resisted. Regime elements came into the city, took over this national hospital, killed everybody in it. Dozens of people. We don't know how many, but you look at pictures of the body bags, and there's probably 50 or 60. The videos are really horrendous. I published one of the videos very early on, and I was inundated. My X account was inundated with regime supporters saying this is fake news. These are not real things. They've either been doctored, or the Druze were killing themselves because Hijri, one of their leaders, they've tried to demonize him and said that he's evil and he's shooting all these Druze because they really want to be give up their guns to the government. It was very hard to tell what the truth was in those first moments, but there's there are major narrative campaigns going on in social media to defend the government, to defend the Druze, this sort of thing. But a lot of Druze have been killed. We don't have a sense so far, but it's probably going to approach 1,000. Whole families have been mowed down in their houses and so forth. Now, a bunch of Bedouin got killed, and Druze were very brutal to regime troops that they later captured. And there were executions on both sides. And I'm not saying that, but this is the way that the government has been treating minorities.
Yes. Well, that's what I was going to ask you about. So this follows the documented sectarian killings against the Alawites. And the death toll there is unknown, but it's believed to be very, very high. And that was also by forces linked to the government. Talk about what happened there and what a recent Reuters investigation newly confirmed.
Right. Well, about 2,000 Alawites were killed. The government is claiming that it came out with a report just the other day and said it was about 1,465, just under 1.5. But it's probably closer to 2,000. The government has closed down a lot of its bureaus for registering deaths along the coast. I know that because my father-in-law, an Alawite, died recently, and the family has still unable to record his death because all the offices are saying, come back later, we're closed on this, you can't register the death. So there's a lot of sleight of hand going on here, but 2,000 Alawites were killed on the coast, roughly. And this started with an attack on regime soldiers by some Alawites. And about 16, 17 Alawite soldiers were killed in one incident, and it spread to 2 other places. Now, the Alawites claim this is because we're being terribly mistreated, and this little convoy of troops was coming to a village to drag people out, claiming that they're Falul Nizam, that they're regime remainders, and that they're coming to drag them off for transitional justice. The trouble is, transitional justice is dragging people off and shooting them. There haven't been court trials. It's unclear. Many innocent people have been killed. People have never served in the military. Houses have been robbed. So Alawites were beginning to feel this regime is just going to kick us to the curb and mistreat us. So It's hard to tell. The regime said this is a big conspiracy with Iran to bring back the Assad regime. The Alawites said, no, this is completely false. This was a self-defense thing. But the point is once it began, the regime called for a general mobilization, and tens of thousands of militia members and militias began to swoop down onto the coast that evening in long, big lines of trucks and everything else. And many of them put hate in their heart. They had their jihadist principles of, we're going to kill all the Alawites who are unbelievers, calling them pigs, making them bark like dogs. And we got, this outpouring of videos of whole families being lined up and just shot against walls, being made to bark like dogs and being shot. So some villages, over 200 people were killed, and then just laying all over the village. So it was very brutal. 5 of my wife's cousins had their houses broken into. People asked them, are you Alawite? And then they proceeded to steal everything in the house, their car keys. One of them's son, Haidar, who grew up with my son, was dragged to, he never served in the military. He was an only son. You don't have to serve in the military if you're an only son. He's the breadwinner for the family because the father had died of a heart attack and the mother didn't work. So, and he was dragged out to the steppe and just shot summarily. And this happened in family after family up and down the coast. And so it just put terror into the whole minority, and they begun to flood out of the country as a result. The statistics from the UN show that about 100,000 Syrian refugees in Lebanon have returned to Syria since the fall of the regime, the Assad regime, mostly Sunnis. But 100,000 have fled into Lebanon since the fall of the regime, mostly minorities and mostly Alawites who are looking for safety. So the shoe is on the other foot, and the regime is increasingly using force and a good dollop of terror in order to try to subjugate the minorities who've been recalcitrant. And they're a problem, but they don't feel that there's any protection for them. They don't have any buy-in, and they don't trust this ex-Al-Qaeda guy who, who has a very low regard for these minorities as unbelievers and so forth. The language that's used by officials is, is very religious language, and it really marks them out for persecution.
Well, so on that note, how did the government respond recently when there was a suicide bombing in Damascus at a church?
Well, the Christian church, well over 20 people were killed, a bunch wounded. And the priests and so forth said, we didn't get a visit from the president. So if the president did finally call them, the minister, the Christian minister, woman minister, did immediately go there. And in the subsequent days, some other ministers went. But this was after Christians began to complain that they felt like they weren't treated the same as other people, and that the regime didn't really want, the president didn't really want to address the issue properly. So the Christians feel like that the government is begrudgingly recognizing their pain, but not doing it in a serious way. Right. And so all the minorities are, feeling like they're being kicked to the curb. And it must be said that the minorities were spoiled by the French during the first half of the last century. They were overrepresented in the military. Bashar al-Assad and his father were Alawites, and they privileged minorities because they needed minority support. And so many Sunnis feel like the West has supported this, has put up with this, and they've been mistreated for a century, and that the minorities are always spoiled, and therefore, they're getting their comeuppance.
Well, but the minorities were also protected from sectarian atrocities, and that's why some of us, just I'm speaking for myself here, we're opposed to regime change. On top of the fact that I don't think we have the right to flood a country with weapons and fuel and arm and al-Qaeda-dominated insurgency. It's also a disaster for groups like the ones that are being attacked now. And I think we're seeing an ongoing reminder of that with all these atrocities and that chant that was attributed to some of the early protests, Christians to Beirut, Alawites to the grave, the protests against Assad. I mean, that's proved to be prophetic. They are sending Alawites now to the grave. So whether you want to call that previously Alawites being spoiled or just being maybe protected from sectarian murder.
Well, and you didn't have to go very far. When al-Qaeda takes over, even an ex-al-Qaeda guy who's trying to fly right, and he's surrounded by all these al-Qaeda guys, that's what's going to happen. We saw it in Iraq.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that minorities are going to get persecuted. And they are being persecuted, and they're being robbed. They're having their houses taken over. So, yes, America was concerned about Iran. They wanted Iran out of Syria. They wanted Iran to stop funding Hezbollah. That was the primary concern of America. And if having al-Qaeda take over, that was the price.
That's right.
And in a sense, so that's what's happened.
That's why Jake Sullivan said in that infamous email to Hillary Clinton, al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.